"Ma'am, step away from the suitcase." The command cut through the noise of Terminal C like a blade through paper. Conversation stopped. Rolling carry-on slowed. Heads turned. For a brief second, even the steady rhythm of departure announcements seemed to fade into the background. Ava Brooks stood motionless beside a red hardshell suitcase near Gate 27, one hand resting lightly on the extended handle. The overhead lights reflected across its glossy surface while dozens of travelers watched from a cautious distance. She blinked once, calm and unreadable, then slowly raised her eyes toward the uniformed officer approaching her. The airport was crowded with early evening traffic. Families hurried toward connecting flights. Business travelers balanced coffee cups and laptop bags. Children pointed toward the massive windows overlooking the runway where jets taxied beneath the fading orange glow of a North Carolina sunset. Yet suddenly none of that mattered. Every eye seemed fixed on the woman standing alone beside the red suitcase. Officer Ethan Walker moved forward with the confidence of someone who believed he had already solved the case. His polished badge caught the light as he gestured toward the luggage. Behind him, two airport officers exchanged serious glances. AK-9 unit stood several feet away. The German Shepherd's ears remained alert, its gaze locked on the suitcase. The dog had stopped near Ava only moments earlier. That single action had transformed an ordinary arrival into a public spectacle. "Is there a problem, officer?" Ava asked. Her voice was steady, low, controlled. Ethan studied her carefully. Mid-40s. Black woman. Traveling alone. Dark blazer. Practical shoes. No visible signs of panic. Somehow that calmness irritated him more than nervousness would have. Most people became flustered when surrounded by law enforcement. She simply stood there, watching. "We need to inspect your luggage," Ethan said. "For what reason?" Ava asked. The officer's jaw tightened slightly. Around them, travelers pretended not to stare while staring anyway. Smartphones appeared. Whispers spread. Human curiosity moved faster than any airport announcement. Ethan glanced briefly toward the K-9 handler. The answer was obvious in his mind. The dog's alert had already convinced him. "Ma'am," he said, his tone growing firmer. "We have reason to believe this suitcase may contain prohibited materials." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Ava looked down at the red suitcase, then back at Ethan. Not anger, not fear, just a long, measured look that somehow made him uncomfortable. "That's a serious accusation," she replied. "It's a serious situation," Ethan answered. The distant roar of a departing jet vibrated through the terminal windows. Somewhere above them, another boarding call echoed across the concourse. Life continued moving around the scene, yet the small circle surrounding Ava seemed frozen in time. She loosened her grip on the suitcase handle and folded her hands calmly in front of her. There was no argument, no dramatic protest, no attempt to leave. That only reinforced Ethan's certainty that he was in control. He nodded toward the luggage. "Open it." Ava's eyes rested on the suitcase for a moment. Then she looked directly at him again. "Officer," she said quietly, "I strongly recommend that you contact your department commander before you do anything else." Ethan almost laughed. To him, it sounded like another traveler trying to sound important. Another person hoping a name or title could make a problem disappear. He had heard versions of that line for years. But something in Ava's expression never changed. The calm, the certainty, the complete absence of fear. And for the first time since walking toward the red suitcase, a small, unwelcome question began forming in the back of Ethan Walker's mind. Ava Brooks did not look like someone arriving to take command of an entire police district. That was precisely the point. Less than 12 hours earlier, she had stepped onto a flight from Washington, D.C., carrying only the red suitcase, a leather briefcase, and a set of sealed transfer documents that very few people had seen. The department had arranged her arrival quietly. No ceremony, no press conference, no welcoming committee. The city had been struggling with internal complaints, declining public trust, and a leadership transition that officials hoped to manage without attracting attention. Ava had agreed to the plan immediately. After 20 years in law enforcement, she had learned that people often revealed their true character when they did not know who was watching. Now, standing beneath the bright airport lights, she could not help noticing the irony. Officer Ethan Walker folded his arms. The crowd surrounding them had grown larger. Travelers slowed their pace. A teenager pretended to check messages while holding a phone slightly too high. An elderly couple whispered near a row of seats. Somewhere nearby, a coffee grinder hummed from an airport cafe. Ordinary sounds continued, yet the tension around the red suitcase felt impossible to ignore. Ethan studied Ava again. Something about her composure bothered him. Most people became defensive. Some became emotional. Others immediately demanded lawyers or supervisors. Ava did none of those things. She simply stood there with the patience of someone accustomed to waiting. "You still have not explained why I should call a commander," Ethan said. Ava glanced toward the large windows overlooking the runway. A jet lifted into the darkening sky, its lights blinking against the clouds. "Because it may save everyone a great deal of embarrassment," she replied. Ethan shook his head. One of the younger officers beside him smirked quietly. The response sounded rehearsed, almost arrogant. Yet Ava's expression never changed. Her shoulders remained relaxed. Her breathing remained steady. The younger officer leaned closer to Ethan. "Should we bring her to secondary screening?" he asked. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely." Ava listened without reacting. Years earlier, when she had been a rookie officer in Baltimore, her training supervisor taught her something she never forgot. The loudest person in the room rarely controlled the situation. The calmest person usually did. She remembered those words now as airport announcements echoed overhead. Flight 482 to Dallas had begun boarding. Families gathered their bags. Business travelers hurried past. Life moved forward around the growing misunderstanding. Ethan pointed toward a secured inspection area several yards away. "Ma'am, we are going to continue this somewhere more private." Ava looked at him carefully. For the first time, she noticed a trace of uncertainty hidden beneath his confidence. It lasted only a second. Then it disappeared. "Officer Walker," she said calmly. Ethan frowned. He had never introduced himself. Neither had anyone else. "How do you know my name?" he asked. The question landed heavier than he expected. Ava's eyes shifted briefly toward the badge pinned to his uniform, then back to him. "Because details matter," she answered. And somehow that simple response made the growing crowd fall even quieter. Officer Ethan Walker had spent nearly 13 years building a reputation that mattered to him more than he would ever admit. He was the kind of officer who arrived early, kept his uniform immaculate, and remembered every commendation he had ever received. Framed certificates covered the wall of his home office. Letters of appreciation sat neatly organized in folders. He believed hard work earned respect. More importantly, he believed his instincts were usually right. Standing inside the airport security area, he felt those instincts guiding him again. The woman in front of him remained too calm. The situation felt too unusual. The alert from the K-9 unit had only strengthened his confidence. Around them, airport personnel quietly adjusted barriers to redirect foot traffic. Curious travelers lingered near the edges of the scene. The polished floor reflected the bright overhead lighting, while distant departure announcements echoed through the terminal. Ethan glanced toward the red suitcase. Whatever was inside would eventually explain everything. At least that was what he told himself. Ava Brooks stood quietly beside a stainless steel inspection table. Her leather briefcase rested near her feet. She had not argued. She had not raised her voice. She simply watched. That bothered Ethan more than open resistance ever could. Most people wanted to prove something when placed under scrutiny. Ava seemed completely comfortable allowing events to unfold. One of the younger officers stepped closer. "You really think this is the one?" he asked softly. Ethan folded his arms. The dog does not stop without a reason. The younger officer nodded immediately. Ethan noticed the reaction and felt a small sense of satisfaction. People trusted his judgment. Supervisors trusted his judgment. That trust had helped him advance through the department faster than many of his peers. In fact, rumors of an incoming district commander had been circulating for weeks. Ethan secretly hoped the new leadership would notice officers like him. Officers who got results. Officers willing to act. Across the room, Ava slowly removed a folded boarding pass from her coat pocket and slipped it onto the table. The motion was deliberate, unhurried. Ethan found himself studying her again. The expensive but practical blazer. The polished shoes built for long hours rather than appearances. The posture of someone accustomed to authority. For a brief moment, a memory surfaced. Several months earlier, during a leadership seminar, a guest instructor had spoken about command presence. Real authority, the instructor said, did not need to announce itself. Ethan pushed the thought away. He was reading too much into things. Open the suitcase, he said firmly. Ava met his eyes. You still have time to make one phone call. Ethan shook his head. And you still have time to cooperate. A silence settled between them. Not hostile, not emotional, just heavy. Outside the inspection area, a maintenance cart rolled past with a low electric hum. Somewhere nearby, a child laughed before being hurried away by a parent. Ordinary life continued. Then Ethan noticed something unexpected. The K-9 handler was staring at Ava with growing curiosity. Not suspicion, recognition. The handler narrowed his eyes as though trying to remember where he had seen her before. Ethan followed the look but dismissed it immediately. Whatever connection the man imagined could wait. Right now, Ethan believed he was moments away from proving he had made the right call. He reached for the suitcase handle, completely unaware that the next few minutes would change how his entire department saw him. The red suitcase clicked softly as Ethan Walker released the final latch. The sound seemed unusually loud inside the inspection area. Conversations beyond the security barrier faded into a distant murmur. Even the younger officers stopped moving. Everyone was watching. Ethan lifted the lid with the confidence of a man expecting validation. Instead of the discovery he anticipated, he found something far less dramatic. Neatly folded clothing occupied one side. A travel toiletry kit rested in a corner. A pair of running shoes sat carefully packed beneath a lightweight jacket. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing appeared threatening. Ethan frowned. The certainty he had felt moments earlier weakened slightly. Keep going, one officer said quietly. Ethan nodded and began removing items one at a time. A navy sweater. A notebook. A small framed photograph wrapped in protective cloth. As the contents accumulated on the stainless steel table, Ava remained silent. She watched with the same calm expression she had carried since the beginning. Several travelers standing behind the barrier exchanged confused looks. This was not what they expected either. Ethan continued searching. Beneath a layer of clothing, his hand touched a large sealed document folder. The material was thick and official-looking. A dark blue government seal appeared near the edge. Ethan immediately straightened. What is this? He asked. Ava's eyes shifted toward the folder. For the first time, something changed in her expression. Not fear. Not panic. Concern. Officer Walker, she said carefully. That folder is not intended for public review. Ethan felt a surge of confidence return. There it was. Finally. Something important. Something she did not want examined. Around him, several officers leaned forward. The younger officer folded his arms with a knowing smile. Ava took a slow breath. You should stop now. Ethan shook his head. That is not your decision. The airport lights reflected across the polished surface of the folder as he placed it on the table. The room seemed to shrink around that single object. Somewhere in the terminal, a boarding announcement echoed through the speakers. No one inside the inspection area paid attention. Ethan broke the security seal. The sound of tearing paper felt strangely final. Ava lowered her eyes for a moment. Not out of defeat, almost out of disappointment. Ethan opened the folder and flipped to the first page. Then he froze. The confidence disappeared from his face so quickly that the younger officer noticed immediately. The smile vanished. Silence settled over the room. Ethan stared at the page. Once. Twice. A third time. He was certain he had read it correctly, yet his mind struggled to accept it. Across the top appeared the official department heading. Beneath it sat a large transfer authorization bearing multiple signatures. And directly in the center of the page was a name. Captain Ava Brooks. New district commander. Effective immediately. Ethan's throat tightened. The younger officer stepped closer and looked down. His face drained of color. Another officer followed. Then another. No one spoke. No one seemed capable of speaking. Ava stood quietly beside the table while the realization spread across the room. The woman they had questioned. The woman they had doubted. The woman whose instructions they had ignored. She was not a visitor trying to avoid scrutiny. She was the incoming leader of the entire district. Then, as if the timing had been arranged by fate itself, a nearby desk phone began to ring. The ringing phone seemed impossibly loud. No one moved at first. Officers stared at the open folder while the sound echoed through the inspection area again and again. Finally, the younger officer nearest the desk reached for the receiver with an unsteady hand. Airport police operations, he said. His expression changed almost instantly. The color drained from his face. "Yes, sir," he replied. "One moment, sir." He slowly turned toward Ethan Walker. "It is Chief Reynolds." Ethan felt every eye in the room shift toward him. The receiver suddenly seemed heavier than it should have. He took it carefully. "Chief Reynolds," he said. The response came immediately. Sharp. Direct. "Officer Walker, tell me why Captain Ava Brooks is standing in an airport inspection area instead of being escorted to headquarters." Ethan swallowed. The room became perfectly silent. Even the travelers, watching from behind the barrier, sensed something had changed. "Sir, there appears to have been a misunderstanding." The answer sounded weak the moment it left his mouth. "A misunderstanding?" the chief repeated. "Captain Brooks was scheduled to arrive 40 minutes ago. Half the command staff is waiting for her. I personally approved her transfer package." "Explain the misunderstanding." Ethan glanced toward Ava. She remained composed. Her hands rested lightly against the edge of the inspection table. Not once had she attempted to embarrass him. Not once had she raised her voice. Somehow that made the situation feel worse. "The K-9 unit alerted near her luggage, sir," Ethan said. A pause followed. "And after the alert, did anyone verify the situation before creating a public scene?" Ethan had no answer. The silence said enough. The chief exhaled heavily. "Put Captain Brooks on the phone." Ethan extended the receiver. Ava accepted it calmly. "Good evening, Chief Reynolds." Her voice carried the same quiet confidence it had from the beginning. Several officers lowered their eyes immediately. "No, Chief," Ava continued after listening for a moment. "Everything is under control." Ethan looked up in surprise. She could have listed every mistake. She could have described exactly what had happened. Instead, she chose different words. "Everything is under control." The statement settled over the room like a weight. After a brief conversation, Ava returned the phone to its cradle. Nobody spoke. The younger officers stood motionless. The K-9 handler looked away awkwardly. Even the travelers behind the barrier seemed uncertain whether they should remain or leave. Ava slowly began repacking her suitcase. She folded each item carefully. The sweater, the notebook, the framed photograph, the running shoes. Every movement was deliberate, professional, dignified. Ethan watched silently. Shame crept into his chest with every item returned to the suitcase. He thought about her warnings. He thought about her patience. Most of all, he thought about how quickly he had decided who she was before knowing anything about her. When Ava finally closed the suitcase, the latches clicked shut. With a soft metallic snap, the sound seemed to mark the end of something. She extended the handle and stood upright. "Captain Brooks," Ethan began. The words felt difficult to form. Ava looked at him. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared on his face instead of hers. "Yes, Officer Walker." Ethan opened his mouth, searching for the right explanation, the right apology, the right defense. But standing there beneath the bright airport lights, he realized none of those things would change what had already happened. The ride from the airport to headquarters felt longer than it actually was. Rain clouds drifted across the evening sky, turning the city lights into blurred reflections against the windows of the department vehicle. Ava Brooks sat quietly in the back seat with the red suitcase beside her. Chief Reynolds had insisted on sending a driver immediately after the airport incident. But even now she found herself staring at the passing streets rather than reviewing the briefing materials waiting inside her briefcase. The city was unfamiliar. The circumstances were not. During her career, she had learned that people often revealed themselves long before they revealed the truth. By the time the vehicle arrived at police headquarters, the building's glass entrance reflected a deep blue twilight. Inside, command staff members stood waiting near the lobby. Some appeared nervous. Others appeared embarrassed. News traveled quickly inside law enforcement agencies. The airport incident had already become the only topic anyone seemed interested in discussing. Chief Reynolds greeted her personally. His silver hair looked slightly disheveled, as if the evening had not unfolded according to plan. "Captain Brooks," he said, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology." Ava shook it politely. "What matters now is moving forward." The answer surprised several people standing nearby. They had expected frustration, perhaps even anger. Instead, they saw the same calm professionalism she had displayed throughout the evening. Reynolds guided her toward the elevator. As the doors closed, the noise of the lobby faded away. For a moment, Neither spoke. Then the chief exhaled slowly. You should know something, he said. I selected you because this department needs trust restored. We have talented officers. Good officers. But somewhere along the way, too many people started making assumptions before gathering facts. Ava looked at the floor indicator as the numbers climbed. Assumptions are easy, she replied. Leadership is harder. The elevator opened onto the executive floor. Soft lighting illuminated a quiet hallway lined with framed photographs of former department leaders. Ava noticed something immediately. Every portrait displayed a similar face, similar background, similar story. Reynolds followed her gaze and understood without explanation. You would be the first, he said quietly. Ava nodded but said nothing. They continued walking until they reached her new office. The door stood open. Inside, a desk overlooked the city skyline. A small welcome folder sat neatly arranged beside a department badge bearing her name. Captain Ava Brooks, District Commander. The office was silent, peaceful. For the first time all evening, she was alone. Reynolds offered a final welcome before leaving. The door closed softly behind him. Ava stepped toward the window. Far below, traffic moved through the streets like streams of white and red light. Somewhere across the city, officers were beginning night shifts. Somewhere, mistakes were being made. Somewhere, people were deciding whether they trusted the badge or feared it. Ava rested a hand on the edge of her desk and looked out across the skyline. Then she remembered Ethan Walker standing speechless beside the inspection table. She remembered the certainty in his voice before he knew who she was. And for reasons she could not fully explain, she felt less interested in punishing him than in understanding what had made him so certain in the first place. The next morning arrived beneath a blanket of gray clouds. Rain tapped softly against the windows of police headquarters while officers filtered into the building carrying coffee cups, folders, and the quiet anxiety that follows a difficult day. News of the airport incident had spread through every division overnight. Nobody knew exactly what would happen next. Some believed disciplinary action was coming. Others assumed Captain Ava Brooks would begin her leadership by making an example of Officer Ethan Walker. Ethan himself was no longer certain of anything. He sat alone in the briefing room nearly 20 minutes before roll call, staring at a blank notepad. The confidence that had carried him through most of his career felt distant now. Around him, officers entered quietly. Conversation stopped when he looked up. A few nodded politely. Most avoided eye contact. The room felt different. Smaller somehow. On the far wall, a digital clock changed to 8 a.m. sharp. The side door opened. Every conversation immediately died. Ava Brooks stepped inside wearing her command uniform. The silver captain bars on her collar reflected the fluorescent lighting. Her posture was straight, calm, professional. She carried no notes, no prepared speech. She simply walked to the front of the room and looked at the officers gathered before her. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. This was the moment everyone had anticipated. Ava allowed the silence to settle before speaking. Good morning. Her voice was steady and clear. Before we discuss assignments, I want to talk about something more important. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away. Ava glanced around the room. Every officer here wears the same badge. Every officer here carries the same responsibility. The public trusts us to make decisions based on facts, not assumptions. Ethan lowered his eyes. The words landed harder than any direct criticism could have. Ava continued. Yesterday reminded me of something I learned early in my career. The moment we think we already know everything about a person is the moment we stop seeing them clearly. The room remained silent. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows. Ava looked toward Ethan. Not with anger, not with judgment, simply with honesty. Officer Walker. Ethan slowly stood. Every officer in the room watched. Yes, Captain. Ava nodded once. Tell me something. When you first saw me at the airport, what did you see? Ethan hesitated. The question felt impossible. Yet something about her expression encouraged truth instead of excuses. He took a breath. I saw someone I believed fit a situation I thought I understood. Ava studied him for a moment. Then she nodded again. And what do you see now? Ethan swallowed. Someone I should have listened to. The answer hung in the air. Nobody laughed. Nobody shifted uncomfortably. The honesty carried too much weight. Ava looked around the room once more. That lesson is not only for Officer Walker. It is for every one of us, including me. Several officers exchanged surprised glances. Ava stepped away from the podium. We cannot change yesterday. We can only decide what kind of department we become tomorrow. For the first time since arriving in the city, she saw something shift inside the room. Not fear, not embarrassment, understanding. And as Ethan returned slowly to his seat, he realized the person standing before him was teaching leadership in a way no training seminar ever had. The days that followed brought changes no policy memo could have created. Officers began arriving earlier to briefings. Reports were reviewed more carefully. Conversations that once ended with assumptions now ended with questions. Captain Ava Brooks noticed the difference immediately, but she said little about it. She believed culture changed through habits, not speeches. 3 days after her arrival, a community outreach meeting was scheduled at a neighborhood center on the south side of the city. Attendance had been low for months. Residents often felt ignored. Officers often felt misunderstood. It was exactly the type of situation Ava wanted to address. By 6 o'clock that evening, folding chairs filled the room. Parents sat beside local business owners. Retired teachers chatted quietly near the back wall. Rain tapped softly against the windows while coffee brewed on a table near the entrance. Ethan Walker arrived early and took a seat along the side wall. He expected to observe quietly. Instead, he found himself paying attention to every detail. Ava entered without ceremony. No escort. No special introduction. She greeted people individually. She shook hands. She listened more than she spoke. Within minutes, the atmosphere felt different. During the meeting, an elderly resident stood and described a recent misunderstanding involving a traffic stop. Another resident shared concerns about response times. Ava listened to each person carefully. She took notes. She asked questions. She never interrupted. Ethan watched the reactions around the room. People who had entered carrying frustration gradually began sharing ideas instead. Near the end of the evening, a local pastor approached the microphone. His voice was calm but direct. "Captain Brooks, what makes you believe this department can change?" The room fell silent. Ava looked around at the faces staring back at her. Some hopeful, some skeptical, some simply tired. She smiled gently. "Because I have already seen people choose to change." Her eyes briefly crossed the room and met Ethan's. The moment lasted only a second, but Ethan understood exactly what she meant. The pastor nodded slowly. "That is a rare answer." Ava folded her hands. "Most people think trust is built through authority. I think trust is built through humility. The willingness to admit when we are wrong and do better next time." Several people in the audience nodded. Others exchanged thoughtful glances. The meeting ended nearly an hour later. As residents filed out into the rainy evening, many stopped to thank officers individually. Some stayed behind to continue conversations. Others offered suggestions for future programs. Ethan remained near the back of the room, watching it all unfold. Eventually, he approached Ava. "Captain," he said. She turned toward him. "Officer Walker." Ethan hesitated. Then he spoke honestly. "I spent years believing leadership meant having the right answers." Ava picked up a folder from the table. "And now?" Ethan looked around the room. At the residents talking with officers. At the smiles replacing tension. At the trust slowly beginning to return. "Now I think leadership starts with asking the right questions." Ava nodded once. No lecture. No reminder of the airport. Just a simple nod of approval. And somehow that quiet gesture meant more to Ethan than any commendation he had ever received. 2 months later, the memory of the airport had become something different. It no longer lived inside the department as a source of embarrassment. Instead, it had become a lesson people quietly referenced whenever assumptions threatened to replace facts. The city itself seemed different as well. Community meetings drew larger crowds. Complaints decreased. Partnerships between officers and neighborhood organizations grew stronger. Change had not arrived through dramatic announcements. It had arrived through hundreds of small decisions made every day. On a cool Friday morning, sunlight streamed through the large windows of police headquarters. The sky was clear for the first time in nearly a week. Inside the building, officers prepared for the morning briefing while the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the hallways. Ethan Walker stood near the front entrance reviewing reports when he noticed a familiar red suitcase sitting beside a bench in the lobby. For a moment, he simply stared at it. The same suitcase. The same glossy finish reflecting the morning light. A quiet smile appeared on his face. "Captain, traveling again?" he asked when Ava approached from the elevator. Ava glanced at the suitcase and smiled. "Conference in Richmond. 2 days. Ethan nodded. I hear they are lucky to have you. Ava shook her head gently. Leadership is not about being the smartest person in the room. Ethan laughed softly. I know. You have been teaching us that for weeks. They stood together in comfortable silence. Around them, officers moved through the lobby, beginning another day of work. Phones rang. Elevators opened and closed. Life continued. Ava looked toward the entrance doors where sunlight spilled across the polished floor. Do you remember what you asked me at the airport? Ethan frowned. I'm not sure I want to. Ava smiled. You asked why you should call a commander. Ethan lowered his head with an embarrassed laugh. I remember now. Ava's expression softened. What mattered was not the mistake. Ethan looked at her. What mattered was what happened afterward. The words settled quietly between them. Not as criticism, not as praise, simply truth. A few minutes later, officers began gathering for briefing. Ethan watched Ava pick up the red suitcase and start toward the exit. Several officers greeted her as she passed. Others nodded with genuine respect. Nobody saw only a title anymore. They saw a leader. At the doorway, Ava paused briefly and looked back across the lobby. Sunlight reflected from badges. Conversations echoed softly against marble walls. People from different backgrounds worked side by side beneath the same oath. It was not perfect. No department ever was. But it was better than before. She stepped outside into the morning light. The glass doors closed quietly behind her. Inside, Ethan returned to his duties. Outside, Ava walked toward a waiting vehicle. Neither spoke another word. None were needed. The lesson had already been learned. Sometimes the strongest form of authority is not the power to punish. It is the choice to understand. And as the city awakened beneath a bright American sky, the memory of one misunderstanding had become something far more valuable. It had become the beginning of trust.